Simon Gear, you're part of an initiative called the Greenest event. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But maybe as a broad starting question, is it your belief that business in South Africa is really getting to grips with green issues?
I think we're a lot better than we were maybe 15 years ago. We saw at COP17, suddenly business was really driving the program in a very, very strong way. And I think a lot of people are realizing that there's money to be made out of making sure that your business is properly sustainable and efficient.
Do you think it's not become something where, you know, it's a box that's ticked, I've done the sustainable thing, now let me get on with actually doing the business? The integration's the difficult part. How do you make that happen?
There's a lot of that as well. I mean, there's clearly, we now have integrated reporting as a requirement on the JSE, and you can see when you go through those reports that there's still a lot of businesses that are really just box ticking. But there is also, I think, a lot of corporate governance requirements that you are thinking about things like risk associated with environmental legislation and with efficiencies, and we are beginning to see managers beginning to grapple with those issues in a far more serious way.
You talk about managers. On whose desk does this sit? Is this something that is directly driven from the Chief Executive's office, or does it sit somewhere else in the organisation?
Sometimes it's driven by the CE. We've seen that with Avis over the past 3 or 4 years. Their greening has been very strongly driven by Duvenage. We've seen Coal of Africa, which went through a terrible time environmentally. And then John Wallington came on board and really drove them to become one of the greenest coal mines. I mean, obviously there's a bit of an oxymoron there. To really, really work at being a sustainable operation. And I think those companies where it's not driven by the CE are always going to be in danger of greenwashing or of doing it as a PR exercise rather than as a fundamental
Is there
change.
enough integration between government policy and the private sector in order to make this work properly?
There's not a lot of forward planning. I mean, and coal is a great example. We need to decide whether we're going to mine all the coal that we've got in the country and do it in a sustainable, spread out way, or whether we're going to ring fence some areas and not allow any prospecting. At the moment, we're not doing either. We've got a sort of open house policy. There's also for a long time been this tension between Department of Mineral and Energy and Department of Environmental Affairs and Forestry, often working on conflicting types of legislation and in conflict with each other. So there's not a strong sense of there being holistic policy.
Right. All of these issues will be ventilated at this thing called the Greenest event. You're involved in that initiative. What are you hoping to achieve?
This is an opportunity to sit down for one day and to really be exposed to some quite forward-thinking green guys. So this is not bunny huggers coming to push once again, you know, the same thing that you read all the time.
Bunny huggers are welcome, of course.
They're absolutely welcome, and we get a lot of them, and we love them dearly. But this is our speakers are people like economists and technocrats and financial advisors and these sort of people who really grapple with real world issues and are looking at those through an environmental lens rather than looking specifically at environmental issues.
Is there a specific topic that you'll be focusing on this year?
We're going to be looking at 3 broad things. We're having a look at the National Planning Commission's work and how that impacts on the way we see the environment and on our energy issues in South Africa. Related to that, we'll have a little bit of a State of the Environment report from Dr. Peter Lukey, who's a very senior technocrat within the Department of Environmental Affairs. Then we'll be having a look at fracking. We'll pick out the one environmental issue that we think business should be engaged with. Fracking is important not only because it speaks to our energy future, but because it's also quite a good case study for how we grapple with environmental issues and you know, whether emotion is a good way to deal with them.
Good point. How do you take the emotion of a debate out of something like that? Because every single issue that you've raised is completely overlaid by emotion, isn't it?
Well,
and fracking is probably the biggest example.
It's a huge one, and it is a real problem. So when you get debates around fracking, you often have groups like the Treasure Career Action Group who have made a policy decision almost to be emotional about it. And when they debate against geologists and mining engineers, they come severely short. And yet, if you look at people like Greenpeace, are often very, very good at really having their facts in line, but also getting emotional about it. So there's no doubt that emotion needs to be used as a specific tool. So we'll be having a look at fracking in that respect, and then we're going to be having a look at this idea of zero growth. There's been a lot of economists and financial planners recently who've been saying we don't have the resources to grow forever. And we're going to get to a point where we run out of resources, and we're going to have a different sort of growth flavour to our global economy. And so we've got some quite good speakers chatting about that as well.
Germane to all of this is the role that NGOs play. You also want to recognise NGOs and the invaluable contribution that they're making to this debate.
This is really exciting. We've got an NGO's NGO of the Year award, specifically for environmental NGOs. We've put out a form for NGOs to fill in who they think are doing the best work in the environmental space, and recognising that, not dissimilar to the Advertising Agency's Agency Award. And I think it's going to be a really nice way to just put the cherry on the top of the day.
Simon Gear, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Cheers.